It's Friday, and we're back again with KTLO. KTLO. Do we want to try to get it together today and say it? Do we really want to try to say it today?
Let's do it.
You're going to count it down?
3, 2, 1. KTLO.
KTLO, keeping
the
learning on.
No. We tried. We failed.
No,
it's okay.
no,
it's
not
really
possible.
okay. It's
you know
not
why?
possible.
We haven't got it set to music. We haven't got our KTLO,
Yeah, that's what we
melody.
need a theme song.
We need a theme song.
Yeah, that's it. No, we don't want that. We don't need that. But here we are, episode 23. Episode 23. And today's ingredients to expedience. And we have little spices and things up in the corner. What does this mean? What are we talking about today? What is it? And I'll tell you what, we're going to have ingredients to expedience. And that's all I'm going to say, because we're going to learn more in a moment or two from the person on the left-hand side of your screen there, Patti Blackstaffe. Balancing technology with humanity. Greg Sanker, humanity. Phew, he's just talking about IT. That's it. That's all there is to. No, that's not true. And then we have Simone, humanizing IT. We're starting to get a little theme going here. Mixology. We'll be talking about mixology today. And I'm just standing out in traffic, trying to avoid the passing taxis. Or Ubers. It's the taxis that I worry about. I used to work in New York City, folks. There were thousands of them. They're not there so much anymore. So here we are, KTLO, episode 23, ingredients to expedience. And our interviewer du jour is Patti Blackstaffe.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, this is a little bit of an uncomfortable spot for me. Usually, I'm not an interviewer, but I'm a coach in a lot of situations. And I do different kinds of interviewing when I'm doing organizational change and engagement and those kinds of activities in my other working life outside of KTLO. When we started KTLO, we call it keeping the learning on. And I had a friend who tapped into me this week and said, that's really cool that you guys are doing this thing where other people get to learn from you. And I laughed and said, really, keeping the learning on is about us learning from each other. And we're having a great time. So who's really learning? Well, I think the four of us are. We're learning how to have our crazy conversations in front of other people, and learning how to try to present ourselves in ways that offer those people a little hint or a little snippet that they might be able to take away based on what we've discovered from each other. I've known Roy for about 11 or 12 years, which is hilarious because we met on Twitter. Roy then subsequently, we ended up in the same kind of industry where we're doing a lot of the same work together, and introduced me to Simone and Greg. And I have to say that it is my pleasure today because I have the opportunity to interview a bunch of people that I hold really high in esteem in terms of how they have contributed to my life, especially in the last year. So without too much hesitation, because I'm a little nervous about this, the topic is...
It's okay, didn't you just notice I was squirming in my seat there?
I was wondering when these cool people that you've met are going to show up for an episode.
Okay, so you're here and you can't get away. Let's do this thing. Earlier this week, we were talking about things. We had an idea on a topic and we were talking about it. And as we do sometimes, occasionally when we're doing these things, we blew it up and ended up talking about something totally different. And the focus ended up being about how we get to a certain place and what that means and what we could offer to that, and some insights on our experience more than necessarily any kind of theoretical work. We're going to talk a little bit about the experience of the people in the room. That's you three. I'm going to start with Simone. I love that you call yourself a mixologist. And I want to ask you the big question, that is, what is the biggest thing people get wrong when they hear you describe yourself as a mixologist?
Okay, so I guess the first impression, because it is an official role title. You will find it out there, that it belongs to the hospitality industry. So the first impression they have is that I work and perhaps even live in a bar, which I'm watching Greg's expression. They probably say that's normal anyway. Yes, that's what happens when we're at our events and networking anyway.
I'm on mute. I'm not saying a word about where you live or mixology.
But considering I spent, a lot of my Christmas holidays as a kid in my grandfather's pub because he owned one, then, that's probably where I started this whole journey in mixology. But, that's what they get wrong, is it's the immediate association, because it is an industry term that's generally used in bar hospitality.
Right. So what do you mean when you say the art of mixology?
Yeah, see, it is an art. Each organization is very different in its own way, and how it's structured, how it communicates, how it, what capabilities it might have in place to deliver their services. Even organizations that are competing, where they say, yes, we have the same service, but the way in which they go about it is going to be different. They'll use different technologies, different people, different skill sets, that kind of thing. So in doing that, if we really want to have something that's really smooth flowing, then it takes more than one way of working. We've seen organizations come and go because they got stuck in just one way of being or one way of working. So it's really important that they can mix things up. And that's where the art of mixology comes in. It's about knowing all the different ingredients, being able to assess the culture of what's going on, understanding what is the essence of the moment in which they find themselves, and then what do we have, what are our capabilities that we can bring it all together. And
so what do you mean by ingredients?
Concoction.
I'm going to ask you what you mean by ingredients. So I understand that you've got a culture, you've got a way of doing things, a flow. What do you mean by ingredients? Help me out there.
So the ingredients themselves, and when I mention some of these, people will recognize them. Amongst all of the frameworks, approaches, methods, techniques, and things that organizations have in place, we will find common elements in them. So whether it's HR, IT, finance, sales, and marketing, there are common elements. Things like governance, ethics, things like the guiding principles that they go by, the collaboration, the communication, the transparency required. And those are very common elements, and there's a whole bunch more. So, you could open up the pantry on that one easily, because each of those things I mentioned takes a deep dive even further into other special types of things. There's more than one type of curry, as we know. So that's what I mean by all the different ingredients that are there. And that includes, the people aspects as well, the different levels of capability that we will have in there. So how deep does that go? Are we fly-by-nighters? What's the depth of our executive team? What's the depth of our guys on the ground? Their ability to maneuver and all of that kind of stuff. These are all the ingredients. There's a whole host of stuff.
So as a mixologist, what you're saying is you take those ingredients and you look at the best of the best and fit it with the culture or the taste of the client, so to speak.
Exactly. It is a flavor.
All right. I heard you say the other day, there are no substitutes for some things. Let's jump into that, because we were having a very passionate conversation about people who believe they're going to change their whole world by zooming in on one framework. and they pour a whole pile of money into it, and then all of a sudden they realize that by following this framework, almost like they're doing, as opposed to engagement is what I would describe when I'm working with people, as opposed to engagement, it's a spreadsheet exercise and of checklists. I want to explore the no substitutions piece.
So I've just thrown up a new background. It's something I use in some of my workshops, especially when I'm confronting people that seem to be a little bit stuck in one way of being. And part of it is, if I can turn a little bit, you might see my little margarita there, because that's our balancing act. And there's so many different types of frameworks out there. There are the IT ones, there are the HR ones. You'll notice that some of the frameworks that are on the screen, whether it's agile, but you also have organizational change, you have knowledge management, you have Kinevin, you'll have project management types. There's a whole host of them. And the question mark that's sitting above the margarita glass is like, yeah, do you want an extra dash of this or an extra dash of that? Oh, hey, I've got this new one I think you might like to try. When we talk about that, there are some things that we cannot substitute. There are frameworks that are unwavering. They are timeless. And there is a benefit in being a practitioner in both the classic and contemporary frameworks and methods and approaches. But we also need to evolve, and we need to learn and apply those skills of being more bespoke and being able to mix that. Oh, I tell you what, in some of these frameworks, there are some really exquisite and curious concoctions that you can develop when you bring these things together. And that's where, but the important thing is that when we're doing that, we do want to make sure that we're looking at the premium ingredients within them, and that we're using authentic ingredients. That's something else too, because otherwise we're not sure if we're playing with, we're muddying the waters or not. In some ways. So the art of mixology is really that guide of navigating that multitude of approaches and methods that are out there, so that we're actually creating or providing fixing solutions to suit the context of what the organization is in.
As I look at those dots behind you, I'm OCM alone. I did some research not long ago. I've been doing organizational change management for 12 years, among other things, as part of transformation. And what's interesting is I found over 136 OCM frameworks, right? Yes. So it's everybody's got their story, and oftentimes it's used to be able to say, hey, we have a path, we're going to help you. I think what you've just described is a really good way of saying, hey, the framework is one thing, but how you actually implement it so it fits the taste of the client, the culture, the environment, and the work, that the outcomes that you are trying to achieve may mean that you need to pull from each a number of different ones. Don't get hung up on one thing and think it's the be all and end all. Greg.
No, absolutely not.
Greg, I'm going to jump in and say, so Greg is the guy who is on a pursuit of excellence. He's really great about investigating. Okay, I'm putting you on the hot spot here. Greg is really great about taking an idea or a thought or a plan or a strategy and saying, okay, but let's really get into the weeds here and look at picking it apart to decide how each piece is actually going to get us toward excellence. So in the pursuit of excellence, Greg, what about those ingredients? How do they relate to the pursuit of excellence?
Wow, that is a great jump off point. I'm not even sure where to begin. But I really resonate with some of the things that Patti said, that Simone said, sorry, about the right ingredients and mixed properly, because so often in organizations, we find the solution to life's problems and we implement it and we implement it and we implement it. And it doesn't seem to solve life's problems. I mean, everybody remembers Lean Six Sigma and TQM and all of these things that we as an industry has been through. And we now have a modern workforce, a young workforce that is energetic and pursuing excellence of their own. but who may not have a historic understanding of, yep, been there, done that. We've been down this path before. Yep, new names, new things. But at the essence, we have a very similar thing. And so my focus is on, you need to become expert at understanding the cultural context, the organizational context, the challenge of organizations. And so many of us have spent so many years operating in silos. I'm an IT person, I'm an HR person, I'm a manufacturing person, and we spend our time focused on those things in the exclusion of other things. And if you think about cooking, which is not unlike mixology, where you take ingredients, you combine them, and you create some dish that might be delicious. Now, my own journey in cooking, which is pathetic at best, I can follow a recipe. I'm pretty good at that. In fact, I'm very analytical about following the recipe. And the thing is, I made a dish. I'd rather not say too much details about it, but I followed the recipe, and it was horrible. It really was. There are people, witnesses, that can verify that it was a terrible dish. The instructions very, very specifically. Here's two things. One of my ingredients was different than was expected, and I didn't know the difference. One, so I had an ingredient that was wrong, and I believed that it was the right ingredient. And two, I didn't sufficiently taste the dish as I was preparing it to use my own senses and to determine, wow, is this right? Right? I just followed the recipe. Now, this has a massive analogy to what we do in organizations. If you don't understand the ingredients, if you're not familiar with them, you may just assume that ingredient A and B are functionally equivalent, and they're generally not, and they apply in different circumstances. And the other thing is, you have to apply your own understanding of what's happening in your organization before you know if what you're doing is actually going to solve the problems or meet the needs of that organization. And that's where we get into trouble. So true excellence comes from being very familiar with what your organization is trying to do horizontally, meaning I can't say I'm going to create the best IT or HR manufacturing organization. I have to create one that meets the needs of the organization that I'm in. My favorite chef, and Simone is going to disagree with me, I already know that, I can see it on her face, is Chef Gordon Ramsay. And Chef Ramsay has made a living out of, screaming at people and causing all manner of oddness within an organization to get people to focus on the quality of what they're doing. He recently has produced a show where he goes to a country or a location in a country, and he meets the local people, and they introduce him to native ingredients that he's never heard of before, he's never prepared before. And he spends a whole week meeting people and learning things. And at the end of the week, he cooks with the things that he's learned and been exposed to, and does a competition. It's a very lightweight competition. It's really more about the culture. The reason I like that is because he learns the ingredients that are locally, but he applies the principles of cooking, the science, the basic elements of how you combine flavors and how they balance and whatnot to create a dish that's expert. And that's what's interesting about the show, because we know Gordon Ramsay is studied under some of the best chefs in the world and is an expert. So him making a dish that he's very familiar with is not particularly interesting, frankly. It's good, but him using his knowledge and expertise and history with cooking and the techniques and the science of it, that's, I find, fascinating.
I think that's absolutely a lot of what we do when we go into organizations. We look at, what is your purpose? We take a look at, how are you functioning now? Where do you want to go? What is the plan that you think will get you there? And then we begin engaging on the local ingredients or the local flavor of what everyone is both emotionally feeling about, say, change or transformation or a technology or the customer service within the organization. The one thing that you talked about was principles and science. And I think that really speaks to experience, right? I often will find with new people who come into an organization who have a great deal of experience behind them. So I love what you said, Greg, because they will be able to take the pulse, but they also don't just listen to someone's story. They make their own mind up about what is best for that culture. So for instance, one person in Gordon Ramsay's show, one person might say, oh, I love this ingredient, and it's 1 out of 27, right? That may or may not be viable, depending on the principles and science that Gordon is trying to put together to make a really great meal. Simone, you have a point on that.
Yeah, just I think the other thing, because it definitely is an art and a science, it is a blending of those two fields, very much so. But the other thing is that not just what people really love, but and we all know, because I love cooking as much as anyone else as well, and I think that's the good thing, you know, with the cooking and the beverage, it works very, very nicely together. But this thing is that not some people have allergies. This is the other thing. We have to find alternatives at times,
Right.
and that's the other point that I'd like to sort of bring in there, that it's not just, oh, let me make this fabulous cocktail for you, or this fabulous dish, taste that, this is amazing. But we have to take into account, and if you like, what are our what's our sandbox, what are our borders of and I don't like to use the word limitations, but I think that comes back to understanding our governance and where using the principles to guide us, so that we ensure that we take into account the context of those things.
I like that. Greg?
Yeah, so governance, huge, because the sky is not the limit. And I am shifting away from the restaurant cooking analogy and into organization. There are constraints, and there may be more constraints than people are aware of. In other words, there's we can't legally, morally, ethically do these things, and therefore we don't do those things, except wink, wink, when we do those things. I mean, there's rules and there's unwritten rules within organizations, but there's other limits and whatnot. Organizations will adopt a cultural value set that, you know, we won't pursue profits at all measures. We will do it, you know, sustainably, or we'll do it, you know, adopting a culture that has the right representation in terms of ethnicity and makeup and whatnot. Or, you know, these are examples of modern constraints that we put on ourselves. But the constraints are very, very important, as is the vision. And so as you elevate within an organization in terms of your accountability for the strategy and the long-term success of an organization, you must become very in tune with what is it that we're trying to achieve. And this gets very close to our why. Why do we exist? And what are we going to do to pursue that thing? And what are those non-negotiable constraints? Because if we're very clear on that, then those of us that are dependent on us know what we're trying to do. They know what the rules of the road are, and they can act relatively independently to pursue that without stepping on grounds or making mistakes, so to speak.
I like that you mentioned constraints. So if we were looking at, and I'm gonna lean over to Roy here. So Roy is has an international reputation for being an influencer in the service management and customer service industry. He'll be turning red because I said that. But I want to bounce over to Roy, because I want to talk a little bit about recipes as they relate to a near and dear to his heart industry that he's been involved in for a while. When we talk about constraints and recipes, what are your thoughts, Roy?
I think one of the things a lot of people don't realize about recipes is that there's flexible and inflexible parts. And for example, baking is pure chemistry, right? It's pure chemistry. You have to have certain things and you have to apply certain temperatures and so forth to them. At the same time, what a lot of people may not think about, unless you happen to live in the Rocky Mountains, is that altitude affects baking immensely. I have a friend who used to live above 10,000 feet, and she had awful times. She never used to bake because she couldn't get stuff to work right. So you have to alter those recipes to fit the altitude. And that's kind of what we're talking about with in terms of organizations being different from each other. Well, maybe you live in Colorado Springs in your organization, and my organization lives in New Orleans, which is below sea level. There's a whole range of ways that you have to apply what you know. And one of the things that springs to mind, and this has nothing to do with cooking, but it does have a lot to do with you, Patti, and you, Simone, and that you're both painters. Bob Ross, easy to make fun of Bob Ross, but I've never seen anybody be as comfortable with a palette as Bob Ross. When he says he's going to use Prussian blue or whatever color, he knows exactly where it is. He knows how much to put on the brush and how much to apply to the canvas to get what he wants. And that's important too. And a lot of times in the IT world, we talk about orchestration. And you can think of a conductor of an orchestra bringing out the clarinets or the bassoon or whatever it happens to be to get what they want. It's knowing what to use to get what you want.
I like that. And you're baking. So there's a couple of things that all of you have talked about that really resonate with me. One of them, baking for sure. We had a ranch in Montana that was at a different elevation than where we lived during the school year. And that was absolutely applicable. In order to bake for the ranch, we had to absolutely change. And it's changed level of moisture, change level of yeast, change level of eggs. And when we go into an organization, I think one of the biggest mistakes I ever made with an organization was believing them when they described their own culture. And I found myself walking in as a consultant and saying, tell me about what you believe I have the power or capability of doing here. And I limited myself by not assessing in a different way. And I think that we do that within our cultures a lot, we as individuals. Greg, you want to bounce off that?
I do. That is so incredibly spot on. For those of us that have spent time in organizations, particularly if you've been successful in producing results in that environment, we develop a sense of our ability to produce results that may not recognize all of the factors of why you're being successful. And so you take that success and you transplant it into a different culture, and you become frustrated of, why am I not able to produce the results? Why can't I get things accomplished the way I know that I'm capable of? And the reason is you're not adapting into that culture. It's like if you show up in Montana and you've never understood that altitude affects how you cook. You say, the science of cooking has suddenly changed. It doesn't work anymore. Shake your fist at the sky. Everything's wrong. The world is out to get me, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact of the matter is you haven't sufficiently understood the elements, the ingredients, the components, the science that is behind that success. There's way more factors to it than just we're adopting agile DevOps, we're using service management, we're whatever, self-organized teams. It's way more than just that.
This is
that
where...
reminds me. Sorry, Patti, I was going to say that
No.
reminds me of when I think about my palette and my piece of material that I keep underneath that palette. What you see on the screen is probably about 20 years worth. I scrape the palette every now and again and get back to it. And that piece of material is probably really, really stiff in some places and still pliable in others. And that reminds me of what you were talking about there, Greg, because there's history. There is history in the places that we come into. There's history in the places that we've lived in, and we've kind of melted into that or molded into that or blended into that sometimes. But the interesting thing I find here is that you cannot pick up another person's palette, because my eyesight, the way I see colors, the way I view things, the way I feel the textures is not the same as somebody else does. And this is where I like this whole art, because the art of mixology comes to colors as much as it does to, food and liquids, etc. That the way you see red is not the way I necessarily see red, and all the shades and everything that come between. And that's the people stuff. That's all the human bits.
Simone, I have to interrupt you and say I'm surprised that you said you see red different than I see red. I'm surprised you didn't say you feel red different than I feel red.
Well, I just wanted to just say that, that because the first thing the human brain processes is that sight, if we're looking at someone else's thing, we sort of see something, but bubbling up underneath that, the brain is already attaching emotion to what we're seeing. And it's an instantaneous process, but you're right, feeling the red or feeling the green or the blue is very different to other people. And every culture sees it differently as well. What some see it as anger, other people will see it as energizing. So yeah.
Definitely. And especially when you talk about conflict, when you're looking at conflict within an organization, some organizations are really good at challenging the status quo. They've got really healthy conflict where they'll say, no, that's not what I do. Let's look at it this way. How about this? What if? Just like Simone's always asking the question, what if? And I'm asking, how might we? But I want to get back to a question, because you said you have to almost immerse yourself in understanding their culture, but also you have to keep a step away, right, Roy? Like there's a certain point where you have to take a step back and not immerse yourself so much you believe what they believe, but that you can see what they believe.
I think from the standpoint of our overriding analogy today, the food analogy and the cooking analogy, what makes a chef a great chef is the ability to project what the person is going to taste when they taste this dish. If they have some common element with that person, they understand how that person tastes things, or how the majority of people taste things. In the case of a restaurant, of course, you can't anticipate every customer who's going to walk through the door, but you prepare things in such a way that most of the people, and in a lot of cases, almost all of the people who come in the door are going to like it. And so there is that element of knowing the science, being able to understand how these things go together, and you're using your taste as a kind of a barometer to measure how other people are going to taste it. And that's would do in an organization, right? You would understand how you approach things and what your expectations are of the outcomes, and you understand enough about how organizations work, and after a little bit of questioning how that organization works, to understand what the people on the other side are going to take away from it and be able to accomplish.
I love that. I'm celiac, and so I'm gonna throw a little thing out here at you. As a person with celiac disease, I can't eat anything with gluten. And when I go into a restaurant, I know when they have a cook and I know when they have a chef, because the cook hands me a menu that says, you can have this meal without this, and without this, and without this, and you can have this meal without. But then I walk into a restaurant that actually has a chef, and it will say, oh, we have a gluten-free menu for you, and here's what we've done. We've substituted this. And so really it's about the whole experience. It's not just about the food. I didn't show up for chicken. I showed up for the experience I get with the flavors and the room and the atmosphere. Simone.
Yeah, Patti, that is exactly the same thing what a mixologist does. So, a bartender can, pull a really good beer and mix you the basic drinks and that sort of thing. But this is why I have always used like a margarita as a basic analogy. And a good old army buddy of mine from so many decades ago, when we traveled the world and have done all these things, we are on the search for the perfect margarita. And the key thing is because it has very few ingredients, but you gotta get the balance right. And that balancing act and how you feel at the time. But a mixologist, when you turn out the bar and, you guys have all been there, you're exhausted. It can be 11 p.m. at night. You've probably stood in the rain at the airport in the taxi queue for however long, all that kind of stuff. And you, just before you go to bed though, you think, I just want to relax just for a few minutes. You walk into the bar and the guy looks at your face and he goes, need something? Yeah. What do you like? I have no idea. And how many times have we had a client that just has no idea what it is they need in their business, their technology or their project? And so the art of questioning the way they question you, well, are you and they use the word feeling. Greg, I'll pick up, see further on that. How are you feeling? You know, is it you want something light and clean and crisp, or are you feeling like something a little bit heavier, maybe a bit creamier? They have the art of questioning down well. And I think as leaders and people that influence and guide in an organization, those questioning skills, that competency is really key to then be able to go, oh, okay, then maybe I can substitute this ingredient here and that one there. And they end up creating something that's unique for you.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna tap into that, because as a mixologist, or say a bartender, like you walked into, basically they are leading. They're leading the experience for the person involved. And a quote came up this week that I thought was really interesting. Mark Crowley posted on Twitter, and it says, research shows that high power people or managers tend to be less sensitive to the feelings of people around them. And as a power increases, their empathy and compassion declines. And this is your point exactly, Simone. And I want to throw this at Greg and Roy to maybe give me some thoughts on this as well with leadership. What are we not doing? What are we missing that's occurring? Is it that they have like, I'm taking a guess here, but that the seriousness of being a leader. So for instance, you Greg, you've been a CIO, and Roy, you've led in multiple different ways throughout your career. Is that experience that you feel like, or do a lot of leaders feel like they have to get really serious, and so they begin looking at, I have to perform because my responsibilities increased, and then that tends to keep us away, or what is it? Greg, I'm going to start with you.
Wow, that's a really good question, and I do see that. I mean, I've talked before about, you know, a small shift in altitude from being an IT operations manager to being a CIO had monumental implications on what it is that you do and how it is that you will be held accountable. And so I see a tremendous amount of, you get guidance from above or from the senior leadership in your organization of, this is what you're going to be held accountable to. It. This is not a joke. You will achieve these. And I think along with that is, the or else clause, of course. So there's a tremendous amount of focus on producing results, and there's not enough time in the day. And so what's the thing that goes? Those things that have a long-term investment strategy, people, relationships, and things like that. So I think there's a natural effect there. But I'm not going to pat myself on the back, but I will suggest that I made a priority of engaging with people. In fact, I mean, I would walk the floor and I would engage people in lighthearted humor. People would ask me, what's the guitar riff of the day? Because I would, in fact, we had a whiteboard in the break room at one point. It was like, what's the riff of the day? You know, the intro to Crazy Train, or, Deep Purple, or whatever it was. Why? Because Greg's a lighthearted, jokey guy. Well, maybe a little bit. But because I want to maintain those relationships. I like people, and I like people to respond to me in a way that's not just, oh, yes, sir, I've got those 3 things and I'll have them by Friday, fear and intimidation and, this soul. I want to grow an organic organization where people are allowed to be excellent, where people become excellent. And bonus points, by the way, if they believe that they did that with or without your leadership. It's like, I don't know what Greg was doing, but I did these excellent results. My customers love me, and all these results. That is what a leader does. A leader isn't all about, I did this and therefore these results. I did this and therefore this person. I did this, da, 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 da. And so I think what the quote that you emphasized, or the research, is probably focused more, I'm guessing, and I don't want to refute it without actually giving it a fair shot. My guess is it's focused more on the management element, managing results, managing objectives, managing employee performance, and it isn't differentiating to a significant degree, I think, on true leadership, which is about empowering people and uplifting people. Because by very definition, that is being emotionally connected and emotionally aware of where others are at and how they're responding to you and how you're responding to them. If you're leadership, if you're engaged in leadership, that's what you're doing. So I don't. I'd like to look at that just a little bit further, but that's kind of my story.
Well, I've got a link to some of the research, and I'll and so maybe we can dig into that a little bit. So what I think I heard from you was the difference between power and leadership, and one is not like the other. But the whole idea of this is the ingredients toward expedience, right? So ingredients to expedience. Roy, I had a talk this week with Ben Brennan, and you introduced us, and it was a wonderful conversation. But what really struck me was when he used these words, and I'm going to tap into you for this because I loved it. He said, we have to stop calling it customer service and start calling it human service, human experience, not customer experience. So if we were going to be expedient and we think about those ingredients, how do we be expedient with quality, speed, knowledge? What can we do differently in our thought process or our mindsets when we're leading a group that are in charge of human experience?
I think I really like to listen to Ben, and I've had multiple conversations. So he's a great guy and extremely smart and very, very sensitive. And he's, I think one of the reasons we get along, first of all, if you look behind him, if you're on a video call with Ben, you see an array of guitars. So both come from music, as Greg does. Yeah.
As Greg does. Yeah.
And we also have had career changes. Ben was a psychologist and came to IT. But that gives us insights into things that, and Ben obviously looks at things from a human perspective, having studied psychology and having done, clinical work in psychology. I think he's right. I think that, but we have to be careful here. We have to be careful how we use terms. And although I agree with Ben, I'm going to stick with the word customer for now, because other people won't understand what I'm saying if I say human service, human experience. Like it's the human experience, man. It's so general, and we have to get there, but we have to work to get there. We have to try. And that's the other thing. We can go back now to the mixology. We can go back to the kitchen recipes. You have to try stuff. And sometimes it doesn't come out the way you want it, but you might work in a kitchen, and most chefs do. I'm sure that Chef Ramsay does, and most professional chefs do. They work with other people. They work with a sous chef. They work with people who do the prep work. They work with people who buy the quality of meat that they need to get. And a lot of it is generated by feedback, right? How does this work? No, it's too thick. It's too thick. It doesn't work. So we have tools now that enable us to get immediate feedback from people. This is a beautiful thing, I think, in my Jersey way. It's beautiful to be able to see how a customer, someone who comes to us for a particular good or service, acts when they get here. Which way do they gravitate? Do they appreciate the things we're doing? And we can get that feedback almost instantaneously. It's so important to be able to see that reaction, and the reactions are all human. We tend to try to separate subjective and objective. We say, well, these results are objective. It came from a survey. No. A survey said, what did you think when this happened? Or what did you feel when this happened? We all respond subjectively. And I think that's what Ben's getting to, is people have reactions that are uniquely theirs. And one of the things I've been saying about customer experience for a long time is you don't create the customer experience. I don't care who you are, what you do not create it. The customer has it when they interact with you, and that's what's important.
So it's what you do with that feedback that matters. It isn't that, yeah. So a lot of us, when we think we do a really great job, we think we're all that in a bag of chips. Occasionally we go home, we, clap our hands and pat ourselves in the back and say, wow, I created a great experience today. But the reality is that, that nobody gets to see the flops. Like Gordon Ramsay's flops aren't shown on TV. His successes are, right? So the successes are the things that we like to show. We like to let people know about. Look at Instagram, just spend 10 minutes on there. You'll never see anybody say, oh man, I suck today, right? They look, even me, I put makeup on today. I don't want to look like I just got out of bed. So the thing is that point you made, Roy, that's really, really important is you've got to try things and you've got to be willing to accept that you're going to flop. I love some of the work that Simone is doing. We both do a little bit of OCM, a little bit of design thinking, and it's think, feel, do. And Simone, I want to tap in a little bit before we finish up here about how we can experiment safely. Like, talk about some safety in experimentation.
What you mean besides putting on the hazard suit and everything before you tell them something's going to go wrong? And when the tomatoes are thrown at you, and
how about cultural psychological safety? Because you do work in that with customers. You do some work with that in terms of psychological safety and cultures for experimentation.
Yeah, it is a very difficult one. I think, as Roy was saying too, you've got people around you that and that you draw on, and their capabilities and their skill sets to help you as well. I said school sets then, but that's also probably just as applicable as skill sets.
I love that. That's a keeper, Simone.
That is a keeper.
We're going to keep the school sets. What you were schooled in is what I was going to say. Because that's what we're bringing to this sort of thing, and creating an environment of psychological safety is a very ongoing thing. So I still look to a lot of other areas. I will look at emotional agility, emotional intelligence. So yes, they're tied, but there's different facets to that. I will look at the neuropsychology side of things, but I think and holistic counseling and different OCM approaches and building resilience, and there's a host of things. But on a very practical level, the human element, being human to human. I think this is what I find when we look at and we're designing projects. I call it the H2H. So not the H2O, but I want, we still need the oxygen in there, but the H2H gets lost. And I think that's an element we need to really be looking at. A lot of it will be focusing on things like emotional vocabulary. It came up earlier in our talk, where how do we describe things? How do if I say red, what does red mean to you? If I say I'm angry, what does angry mean to you? And so I will look at lots of tool sets like the Atlas of Emotions, which helps build emotional vocabulary, which then widens that conversation.
Right. So people can feel like they're not, go do this, but don't screw up is not the impression you want them to get.
That's not the phrasing. So you need to really widen your emotional vocabulary quite, on a large scale. And in doing so, though, you can also ask them about, oh, hang on, well, do you mean this or do you mean that? And again, you're honing in on helping them build their own emotional vocabulary by describing where they're at. And you have to meet them. You don't necessarily get dragged into it with them, but you need to meet where they're at and move with them on that journey, because it's, as Roy was saying, it's their experience, it's their journey. So how they're interpreting the environment they're in and the context they're in is really critical, but you cannot assume by the way they describe it that they mean the same thing as what you're thinking.
Nice.
So that's just we could talk about this stuff for days, but
it's really big.
emotional atlas of emotions, increasing that emotional vocabulary. And this is not frou-frou stuff. This is the reality. These are very specific science-based chemicals that explode in the body as these things happen. And this is where the behaviors are driven.
Love it. Love it. We're coming up on time. I'm going to do a little round table. I'm going to ask each of you a question that you're not prepared to answer. Because, you know, it's always my joy to get you guys caught, because especially Greg, because Greg's always throwing stuff at me that I'm never prepared for. So
this is payback time, Greg.
No, I know what's coming. I totally.
So Roy, I'm going to start with you though. I'm going to go around and start with Roy. I have a particular question for you, and that is, what would you leave people with? I mean, you're an influencer. There are a lot of people who look up to you in the world of service management and customer service. What are some points after today's conversation that you would leave people with that can empower them? They can walk away today and say, okay, I can do something different based on ingredients to expedience.
Listen. So it's so big, and people have different ways of saying things. Sometimes they have trouble articulating what they want. It goes back to language again. Language, okay? I'm a language guy. It's always been that way. But listening to people and understanding what they're trying to express, often not successfully to you, and understanding what you can do to address what it is that they're feeling. That's really where the key is. And just, I love this little dichotomy. In English, we say, if you look at somebody and they're about to lose an opportunity because they're not acting on something, we say, he who hesitates is lost. Right? If you present that same situation to somebody who's a native Spanish speaker, especially from South America, what they're going to say is, camarón que se duerme se lo lleva la corriente. And what that means is a sleeping shrimp gets taken in the current. Wait a minute. It means the same thing, but it's a totally different perspective, right? Yeah. Language can key us into things, and it doesn't have to be that they speak a different language. They're expressing that words that they choose might mean something different to them than they do to you. And so you have to pay attention. So listen is number one. And the most successful CEO I know personally, who I have known for years, is a guy whose key is you listen to what people around you say and you make a decision. It's as simple as that. Nice.
Nice. All right, I'm going to move to you, Greg. We haven't heard your voice in a few minutes. You have an opportunity to work with leaders and IT managers and directors to be able to help them, you influence them because of the role that you've been in the past. What would you leave people with regarding ingredients to expedience today?
Wow. So in a nutshell is you have to shift the focus off of your ability to produce results. And you have to shift your focus onto helping the culture in which you're operating be a culture that is more capable of producing the desired results. And it's less direct and it's less about you, and there's no single right way. And it feels very, very awkward. You know, the saying that you know, what got you here isn't what's going to make you successful here. Most of us got to the corner office by being really good at producing results. But what keeps you in the office or makes you effective in that office is your ability to create or curate a culture, as I've been saying more frequently, in which excellence in producing results is the norm. And that means empowering people. That means truly deeply understanding people and the context in the organization. So you're working horizontally across boundaries, sometimes irreverently across boundaries. You're deeply, deeply trying to understand the context of the organization and then helping to create a culture that inspires and enables excellence in it.
Love it. Love it. Simone, your turn. What would you leave people with today regarding ingredients to expedience?
When we're not feeling strong when we're not feeling in our best place, we will often dive into our comfort foods, if you like, or our favorite recipes or our favorite drink, or, you know, that sort of thing. And we do exactly the same thing with work. We dive into those behaviors that protect us, or what we think protects us, but it more often than not distances us. So something I would like people to think about, and I do like to jumpstart people's thinking, this is me trying to get the emotional and the rational brain blending. It's an art and a science, as we know. But neurons that fire together wire together. And what that means is the more often we focus on something, the stronger that focus becomes. The more we behave in a particular way, the stronger that behavior comes, and so on and so forth. And it's fact, in the brain, we have around 40 major tracks, and they go in like something like 257 different directions. I can give you the research on that. We can give you a link on that, not a problem. And within each tract, there are millions of neural connections. Mm-hmm. And so every night when we go to bed, our brain does what we call synaptic pruning. It's like, think of a hedgerow with all those tree branches and everything going everywhere. And but what we need to do is build our neural plasticity by increasing our language, by increasing our emotional vocabulary, by actually having the interactions and being able to learn to describe our experiences better. And the fact is, you're never too old to learn something new, because it's been proven already. The oldest recorded person to grow a new neuron was 92 years of age. So all is not lost.
I love that. I love that. KTLO is all about learning. It's all about growing. You know, we're trying really hard ourselves to make sure we're adopting a growth mindset. I work with executive leaders, and one of the things, I'm just going to throw my tidbits about what I think needs to get out there individually, both for myself and for leaders out there. Ask yourself some questions. Am I supporting a network of friends and family and colleagues? Do I have an executive coach, mentor, or confidant? Am I making decisions by myself, or am I checking on the feedback? So back to you, Roy, the listening. Am I really listening to what the experts in my organization are telling me before I make a move or a decision? Am I keeping myself in the spotlight, or am I allowing others to be in the spotlight, right, Greg? Am I allowing them to really excel and be exceptional? And do I isolate myself? Because if I'm isolating myself and I'm not engaging in the kinds of things like we do, even just in KTLO, how much of an expanse in my behaviors, my feelings, the belief systems that you guys have challenged for me make a difference. And I think that if we are going to be expedient, we must grow. We must flip out those ingredients. We need to make a difference in the way we challenge ourselves. And like Simone says, get out of your comfort zone, learn, learn, learn. Because as soon as you step out of your comfort zone, you have the really beautiful, beautiful path of being able to create, to grow, and to be able to fly your freak flag in ways you never have before. So thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you if you were listening. If not, then, you know, one day maybe we'll meet you and you'll run across this video, and hopefully
maybe we'll even meet in a bar. Who knows?
Or something. That's right. Simone will mix us something up. We'll all go to France. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for letting me ask you hard questions.
See ya.